Okay, greetings and welcome to another Pan African Community News broadcast. It's the 20th of November 2022. And as you know, we do a roundup of the news as it takes place in the UK from a Pan African perspective every 2 weeks. I'm your host, brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu, and I'm in the studio with Sister Oleander. There's hopefully you can see both of us there. I don't know if you're all able to say hi.
Greetings, everybody. Hope you're doing well.
Excellent. So, as usual, please can you just send us a quick message, a quick chat to let us know that you can hear us and see us okay. We're going live on is it Facebook and on YouTube. So, yes, Sister Oleander will be watching the chats and responding to let us know as well that you're out there and can hear us. Okay. So, as ever, it's a jam-packed week, a jam-packed program. There's quite a lot that comes or occurs in the 2 weeks between our broadcasts. So I'm going to start, as always, with our first section, which, as you know, is our libations, where we do our remembrance. And the first we remember I want to do is a tribute to our brother and elder, Chris Campbell. He recently joined the ancestors at the age of 59. He was a community champion from Corfian in Kimray, that's Wales, that's the colonial name for the term Wales, who was involved in everything from serving food in a local lunch club to campaigning against injustice, organising events, commemorating what's called the Windrush generation as African Caribbean people in Kimray. He was a volunteer for, I think it's the Cozy Kitchen Lunch Club. And, he ran projects, community work for groups as diverse as the armed forces to a memorial service for people who are from minority backgrounds living in Kimray. So just want to acknowledge his passing and just say we remember. The next tribute is to a man named Des Parks. Now, we haven't got his age or the cause of his passing, but he's quite famous for being a record collector, like myself, a compiler and DJ. He put together, I don't even remember the Arista selection of LPs. I'm thinking vinyl now, so I've got to be careful that I don't start showing my age and alienating the half the audience. There was a selection of albums called Rare, and I think it came out on RCA, and it really kickstarted and really helped to push the revival movement in the UK. And he was one of the people who compiled it with his friends. He had a massive knowledge of rare groove music, and so he was able to do that and actually, like I said, kickstart like that interest again in revival music. So, like I said, we don't know haven't got any reasons for the cause of death, but we remember, and it's like as a fellow music lover, I know you're out there in the ancestral realm, helping those who are there to kind of like boogie on down. The next libation is for a historical one, and it's really for one of my icons, one of my role models. I don't have many role models, funny enough. I tend not to idolize human beings, but I do have lots of respect for people who have done amazing works that have led to our own progression and position where we are now. And so this is a remembrance for Kwame Ture, who died on the 15th of Sunday, so in 1998 in Guinea. He passed away from prostate cancer, but he was aged 57. And for those of you who don't know Kwame Ture, he changed his name in 1977 from the name that he was formerly known as, which is Stokely Carmichael. And as Stokely Carmichael, he was the head of the Black Panther movement. But what was notable about his tenure, kind of like doing that work, wasn't just the amazing work he did with SNCC, which is the student wing of the student protest wing that took place in the 60s, challenging and pushing for civil rights. But it was for his amazing oratory and intellectual discourse which introduced us to the phrases Black Power, which he coined, and institutional racism, which he also coined. Now, in the UK, you may note that whenever you heard the term institutional racism, it's normally attributed to, McPherson with the Stephen Lawrence report. But actually, it was Kwame Ture who coined institutional racism. And, he was a giant. He became a Pan-Africanist when he saw that civil rights movement was being compromised and moved, and he recognized that he had to push forward, still pushing civil rights in America, but also pushing forward for the struggle of African people all around the world. So it would be remiss for me to not mention his passing this time, like I said, 15th of November 1998. The next giant, and I say giant, is someone who was active before even Kwame Ture was born. We often talk about kind of like iconic leaders in the 20th century, normally not too far away from the domain of when we were alive and when we lived. But it's also important to remember, hold on, let me mute Sister Oleander's mic. It's also important to remember those who actually done amazing work for us during the era of African enslavement and colonialism. And to that end, we remember the birthday, which was the 18th of November, 1787, of Sojourner Truth. Now, she was an amazing freedom fighter. The language of the time would be abolitionist, women rights activists. I'd like to say theorists, because even though now we are, or many of us might be familiar with the term intersectionality, which Kimberly Crenshaw pushed through the academic sphere, and she did so brilliantly, recognizing these intersecting oppressions that are faced by African women. Actually, Sojourner Truth, with her Ain't I a Woman speech, is probably she is the first to theorize this concept and place it out into the public domain and into intellectual landscape. So we remember Sojourner Truth. It's very important that we don't erase anyone from our history and our, this is not a slight on Kimberly Crenshaw, who's done some amazing work. But it's really important that we also remember that a lot of the knowledge that we have and the cultural practices and expertise and survival techniques and customs that we use today came from our ancestors, many before the 20th and 21st century, and emanating from years before we were either a twinkling in our parents' eyes. You are watching myself, brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu. We're online with Sister Oleander. We're doing the Pan-African Community News program. Please remember, you can join us on the chat on Facebook and YouTube, just to let us know that we are broadcasting. I'm hoping you can hear me. It looks like the mic is going, but just let us know that we're broadcasting okay. That'd be much appreciated. I'm going to continue on. And the next and final libation is one which is apt that I make today. And this is, we celebrate Zombi dos Palmaris. Now, the 20th of November is a special day in the Brazilian calendar because it's a day where people, especially of African heritage, come together in a sense of national pride to remember Zombi. Now, there's been some films and documentaries about Zombi, but Zombi, I don't even think those films could actually do justice for his contributions to our struggle against slavery, colonialism, imperialism. And I linked the three deliberately, the Martha. You see, what happened was that when the Portuguese enslaved African people, Zombi was one of the leaders and the most famous of leaders who put together Quilombo's. And Quilombo's communities, if you think about the Maroons in the Caribbean, and it was all about communities of African freedom fighters that lived together and pushed back in the case of Zombi, pushed back for 100 years. I mean, 100 years from the 1600 to almost 1695 against the Portuguese tyranny. There were some 30,000 inhabitants of these Colimbos. And, the tragedy was that he was caught eventually on the 20th of November, 1695, which is exactly today's date. He was murdered by the Portuguese, and his head was put on display to try and kill the legend of Zombi, to make us forget the reason why we must fight and how we are successful, and we can be successful of pushing back. So, like I said, this is a special day today, the 20th of November. We don't hear much about it in the UK, but in Brazil, this is still a custom that we remember and we celebrate. So it's apt, seeing that we're broadcasting today on the 20th of November, that we do the same here. I do recall there was an event taking place at Goldsmith, which I was invited to speak at, and unfortunately I couldn't. I knew I had this program to do today. But there are communities in London and across the UK that actually do host special events. So next year, look out for them. And, if we're not on air, maybe you might want to attend them. So that's it for Libations. And I'm now going to go through some of the news that's taken place over the last couple of days. And I'm going to start, I say couple of weeks. I'm going to start with UK politics, and as always, try and give it a Pan-African twist. And the first story, which is one that really irritates me, just looking at that guy's face irritates me, is one where Keir Starmer has been criticised for speaking out in I think it was a TV interview, I can't remember, I saw it on one of these social media platforms, for saying that the NHS is recruiting too many people from overseas. Now, I don't know if you've listened to the current Labour leader, but he tends to have this habit of talking from both sides of his mouth continuously. So I'm saying that we need to bring people in and we need to train people, but this time he was talking about the NHS has too many people from overseas. And it really irritates me when a Labour Party says this, because the NHS is a special institution in the UK. And it's almost a quarter, I think it's 21% of the people who run it, the people who make it work, come from African, Asian and other minority ethnic communities. In fact, that percentage, when you look at doctors, goes as high as around 28%. So to now speak about that, we need to get control of immigration, and the NHS has recruited too many people from overseas, and we need to be bringing in and training people from this country to do this job, really is like a spit in the face for the sacrifices made by our ancestors. I have family members, and many of us know family members and friends and colleagues whose parents and grandparents have worked to build the NHS and to make it the institution. And it is a fabulous institution despite its challenges that it is today. There are some people accusing him of what we call dog whistling, which means these kind of comments are pampering to racists, and they're right. It definitely is. It's the Labour Party trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator and forgetting there's many people who, even though they might be racist, actually don't begrudge the fact that the NHS was built by that Labour, and over years have come to move on their intolerance and ignorance. I don't think this is a message that the Labour leader should be pushing out. This is something I expect from one of the more rabid parties. But here we are. This is 2022. And I don't know if you can see the images at the bottom of the page. The image of the young sister, I say young sister, there's a picture of her when she was young. Her name is Margaret Seeley. And it's a picture of her with her husband when she's a bit older. And she's, I think, 70s, in the 70s with her husband. And the reason I include those images there is just as a reminder of some of the faces of the people who made the NHS what it is today. Because our sister Margaret, our elder Margaret, has worked for the NHS for some 30 years. 30 years. So if you look at the two pictures, you'll see the time ravished and etched across her face. and she's developed Alzheimer's now. She had a fall, and her husband Clyde is doing everything he can to take care of her. And she's just a classic example of many of people of African heritage, including people of Asian heritage. But specifically, I'm talking about those who took the call to come over to the motherland, which is what England was referred to, and actually build up the NHS, and is actually now living a life, and is actually not really getting the fruits of that labour. I think she's been married with her partner Clyde since they came over together. I think it was since 20 years. But now that she has Alzheimer's, it's only fortunate that the NHS can provide some kind of physiotherapy treatment for her. But her quality of life isn't in decline. So I just want to juxtapose those two stories: that of Keir Starmer criticising and commenting that there are too many people from overseas, and actually the realities of the fact that the NHS, a quarter of the NHS, is actually propped up by people like Margaret, who actually, even in her late 70s now, is just asking to get back something from what she put in and helped so many people. I'm going to leave that there and move on to the next story, but that one just really irritated me. Politics always irritates me, and I know the next story is going to irritate me even more because it's that one. This is, and I'm not going to spend much time on this one. This is the story of Sean Bailey. I don't know if you remember that Sean Bailey last year was found out to have broken the lockdown rules. He took part in a party in 2022, just like the Prime Minister did. And I'm talking about the current Prime Minister and the former Prime Minister and their aides. Took place. The police did a cursory investigation, and then they dropped the charges. They decided they're not going to prosecute him. So now that they're not prosecuting him, just like they didn't prosecute any other politicians, he's now in line for some kind of peerage, some kind of nomination to the House of Lords. And there's not much I can say about this. I mean, most people will know how he deliberately targeted me and painted smears about me, kind of like alleging that I was anti-Semitic, that I was Afrophobic, that I was, all kinds of silly things. In fact, even now, let me show you something. Even now, I'm in a court case with the Mayor of London for their outrageous behaviour. I don't know if you can see all the papers here. There's like 200 there, another 400 pieces of papers and documents and court cases that I have to read through and analyse in preparation for a court case in a couple of weeks' time. They're using their most expensive lawyers to hide everything under the carpet now that they've won the election and are back in power. So the immoral actors aren't just on the Tories, but they are certainly also with the Labour Party. And it really makes my stomach turn to watch what's happened to politics in the UK, because the lack of ethics and integrity and honour is just absolutely disgusting. But like I said, I don't want to go much on this story because it is really irritating. I did have doubts about including it, but I just want to just make the point that, just in case you don't know why ethics and integrity matter in politics, and there's many other reasons, but I'll give you one reason. We sometimes forget that when Sean Bailey was found out to have been at this party breaking the lockdown rules, when everyone else was suffering and complying and not being able to go to funerals, not being able to see their loved ones as they passed away in hospitals, etc. But he was just partying at the Conservative headquarters. One of the things he did was that he stepped down from his role at the London Assembly. Now, the London Assembly, he was the Police and Crime Committee chair. Just to be really clear, if you ever wonder why bodies like MOPAC, which is the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime, seem so ineffective despite having some amazing people with goodwill in there, is that the chair was this clown, this joker. So it looks diverse, it looks like it's representative, but it's not, because you just have another clown in blackface actually allowing for the most racist and aggressive institutionalized racism and violence to take place without sufficient scrutiny. So I'm going to leave that there because, as you can tell, I'm a little bit biased and a little bit irritated by this particular story. But them's the breaks. I think Trevor Phillips is also going to be knighted as well. So Trevor Phillips, Tony Sewell, and Sean Bailey, all of them are going to be officers of the realm, members of the empire. Them's the ways it goes. So let's deal with UK policing matters while we're there. Like I said, you are watching the Pan African Community News Network. It's, what time is it? It's 1921. It's the 20th of November, 2022. Don't know, we haven't had any comments yet, so I'm hoping that you can see us live. You know, if not, I suppose it'll be recorded to be watched afterwards on YouTube. But if you can see and hear us, if there is no technical problems, please drop a line. I'm here in the studio with Sister Oleander, and we're watching the chats on Facebook and on YouTube, and just going through the stories from the last couple of weeks. So the next story to deal with is one that I'm not going to go over all the ins and outs of, because it's just you know, it's just like a repeat on an infinite loop. So there's a report that half of African people searched by the UK police feel humiliated. I mean, and who's this talking to? Because we know this, right? I could go through the statistics. I could tell you that the report shows that trust is markedly lower amongst African people. It's around 46% than European people, who is around 64%. And in particular, African people with Caribbean heritage, it's even lower at 35%. I can say that, of course, all different ethnic groups, of all the people who had the trust, it's us, you know, those of African heritage who are the lowest, blah, 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 blah. I think the only reason to include this is to say that part of the issue is that we're hearing the words about people feeling humiliated. So we often hear the words abused and violated, but we don't often hear the word humiliated. And I think it's good that that's come up in this report. But this isn't new. This isn't some revolutionary news that we've never heard before. This is just part of the same old. And if you think about what I just said about people like Sean Bailey being the head of scrutiny, a chair of London's Police and Crime Commission or Committee, and then we know how ineffective the IOPC is, then it isn't any surprise that when we have gatekeepers that look like us taking those seats up, that we keep getting reports and results like this. I say this remembering just on the top of my head, and it's not on, I don't have any details on this. There's an organization called Black Thrive that's trying to put together, they've got this really interesting idea, people sourced intelligence, I think it's called, where they're crowdsourcing ideas and proposals like how do we do better scrutiny. And they're going to do something at the Bernie Grant Center. I think it's next week or the week after. So you might want to check that out. They should be, you should be able to find them on Twitter or on Facebook. Black Thrive is what they're called. And they're looking into doing another scrutiny panel. You know, I've got no doubt they're really sincere and they mean well. And I think what's interesting this time is that they're actually looking to give people vouchers for participating. But the truth of the matter is, unless you get real people involved, and I say real people, I'm not just including myself, I'm just calling people who actually feel the pain. You know, so I'm talking about groups like Hack Me Account, who are young people, you know, the people who are going to get stopped and searched. I mean, you know, I have a history of being of abuse from the police. You know, I've been locked up, I've been tased, I mean, all that kind of stuff. But you know, people like Stafford Scott. But unless all of us are involved in this, then what we tend to have is just the bourgeoisie in our community speaking for all of us and then creaming off funding money to line their own pockets. So be mindful. If you're interested in it, check it out, because I know there's some really good people involved. And, you know, and I know that this group Black Thrive, as much as I don't know much about them, I know there's some people that I trust who vouch for them. So I'm willing to give them a shot.
Toyin, we've got a couple of comments. Tamisai Makanza says she can hear, and so does Angela can see and hear us.
Oh, give thanks. It's good to know that we have someone out there, and that's both of you, sharing our broadcast. And thank you for the feedback. It's it's coming to the end of the year, and the news is just relentless, and it seems like it's the same old stories over and over again. But we need to share. We need to be alert. We need to be continuously vigilant about what's taking place. So give thanks for sharing, and let us know that you're there.
Sorry, Toyin. One more thing. Sorry. Tammy's side just said he can hear. So I made an error there. Apologies, Tammy's side.
Okay. No worries. Well, thank you, brother. And I think the other name you said Angie, so that sounds like a sister. So thank you both of you anyway for giving us that feedback. And remember, you can also drop questions and make comments, and Sister Oleander will share them with us. Okay, so after that lovely story about the challenges of stop and search faced by African people, what wins do we have? Well, those of you who've been watching for a while, you'll know that I'm a critic of the Matrix database. But I can't take any credit for this amazing story. And this is this really goes down to people like Stafford Scott and Katrina French, and there's, I've forgotten the name of the musician. There was a musician who also took a case against the police, and these are other people who have been continuously campaigning to get this database deleted. And I think in the last session we talked about the Met Commissioner saying he's going to take 1,000 names off the database, but they've moved on from that now, because I think it was Stafford. That's what's come through my radar. But Stafford, amongst many others, I suspect, but Stafford definitely was actually arguing that people need to know if they're on that database. In fact, that's what the court case was. There was a young musician who felt he was on the database. He didn't know if his life chances had been affected. So he led a case with Katrina French on Stopwatch. I've forgotten the name of the group, not Stopwatch. It'll come back to me. And so the police have finally agreed that it's got to make some serious changes to Matrix. It's not just about dismantling it, but also now they're saying is that, because it's been recognized by the courts, been recognized that Matrix breached the right to private and family life, that African people were disproportionately represented on it. The police have said that anyone who wants to know if they're on the Matrix database can ask, and they will tell them. And not only will they tell them, they'll tell them what data was shared and who it was shared with. Now, this is a good win. I mean, I know it's a bit onerous because it means that if you're on it and you don't ask, you won't know that you're on it. But I can understand, you don't want to stigmatize people by just releasing a massive database with names of people of African heritage on there who've got nothing to do with crime and been forever associated with it. So the fact that people can actually challenge and ask, am I in the Matrix? If I am, what do you have on me? And who did you share it with? Which agencies? Because maybe it affected my housing benefit. Maybe it affected my applications for uni. That's actually a good win. And that's taking place. So I want to say that's really good. And just to give you some context for this, the reason why this database was so toxic, I gave that in the last broadcast, and that's probably on YouTube, so you can check that out. But I think we sometimes forget that of the reported crimes in the UK, it is less than 6%. In fact, it's around 5.4% of them that are actually solved by the police. So I want to let that penny drop. And I say solved by the police, that's not even correct. It's only less than 6%, 5.4% that lead to a charge, which then later on could actually be dropped. So 94%, well, 96, yeah, 94%. Almost of cases that are reported, or crimes that are reported to the police, are unsolved. So having a database of people that you think you can match up as potential criminals, and I know I'm being facetious when I say things like this, is something that does not serve justice. It just says lazy policing. And those of you who know me know that I watch my Columbo on a Sunday. I always at least watch one of the old classic ones. And I miss the days when police officers would do investigative work, when they would not jump to conclusions, not use racial profiling, but actually ask questions. Kind of like, I don't even like that phrase, intelligence, intelligence led. Just kind of like, talk to people, check relationships, study paths, and find out who committed the crimes. Right now, like I said, just over 5% are being solved. So that the dropping of this matrix database is actually a very good thing. Will that increase the clear up rate? I don't know. What I do know is that the police officers who are serving now, who actually rely on databases in a pool of suspects to actually solve crimes, are not of a quality that I would say should be anywhere near kind of policing powers. I'm sorry, the whole thing irritates me. All right, let's move on. So why am I saying these kind of things? I know that you already know why I'm saying these kind of things. It's stories like this. That's why I'm saying these things. Why do I get annoyed? So this is a story about a sister who was behind us on debts. Bailiffs came to her house. She didn't want them to come in. She called the police, or they called the police. I can't remember which order way it went round. Now, I don't know if you know about bailiffs when you're dealing with debts. The police are not allowed to seize any property. The police are only allowed to actually make sure no violence goes off, nothing kicks off. But that's not what took place with this case in this story. The sister, her name was Sharon, she had to make a complaint because, first of all, she didn't believe the men that came across were police officers. So she was kind of suspect about their affects because they said that they were going to help seize the goods, which is clearly not allowed, hence the reason for the 40 grand compensation from the police force. They illegally trespassed in her house and unlawfully arrested her. This is the Northamptonshire police that did this. So, you hear about the police trying to use databases and intelligence-led policing to stop violent street crime. They use matrix as an excuse to stop violent crime amongst young people. That's what they claim it's for. And yet you hear the Bobby on the street who's calling out to a domestic incident about a woman who's got some debts. Debt collectors are coming, bailiffs are coming over there. They're being really leery. And what's happening? I read the whole article. I'm sorry if I seem a bit sporadic when I'm explaining this. I read the whole article, and the police officers telling her that, you know what, they're coming in and they're going to take what they want and we'll help them. And when they arrest her, and they arrested her in her own house. She let them in the house. She didn't let the bailiffs in. She locked the door behind them. And then there was all this noise and commotion. They turned their cameras off so we couldn't see what's happening. Then they arrested her. She opened the door. They arrested her. And then they had a smirk on their face, calling her a nutter and all this kind of stuff. This is what took place. It took some 5 years for our sister Sharon to be given compensation from all this. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So, I mean, anyway, what else can I say? I'll leave that one there. That's the policing news. Let's go to a different topic because that always irritates me. Okay.
So sorry, Toyin. We've got greetings from Afrifinka in Nkrumah.
Oh, give thanks, brother Afrifinka. Good to have you with us. Yeah, like I said, it's everyone's welcome to post comments and or questions while I go through the stories. Sometimes I don't even want to read the stories. It gets really frustrating when you learn about the abuse that are taking place.
I was just thinking about this sister, thinking about how that would feel if that was me, because these kinds of things, when they happen, this is when we have to call the police, a police force, or even a gang, or all these negative connotations that people don't like to hear said about the police. But actually, in a scenario like this, they were not there to serve and protect at all. This sister must have been terrified, thinking that she's letting the police in, and then they handle her like that. It's a disgrace.
Yeah, it was. It just happened in 2017. It's only now that she's being paid compensation. There's a photograph, because what happens is that even though the police turned off their cameras, the bailiff had their cameras on, and so you can see the police officer smirking when he's saying, "Come and grab everything. I told you you'll get everything." I mean, it's just completely. And even though he was suspended, He was reinstated afterwards. The main officer, I think it was a sergeant who took the lead on this. So yeah, the police have admitted that they used unlawful force, and they committed batteries, is what they say. This is the terminology that they use, but they haven't apologized. And if I remember reading correctly, the lawyer said that she was actually willing to take less compensation if there had been an apology. But they haven't apologized. They just paid out the cash, which comes out of the public purse anyway. And he's got his job back. So it took place. They assaulted someone in their own house, and so yeah, I hear you on that. I'll move to the next story, and the next story really, if sit down, it's not a nice one. This is the part where we go to some UK general news, and the first story we have, unfortunately, is the horrific story of Awab Ishak. Many of you have probably heard of this story. This is the 2-year-old who passed away after mold was found in his house, in his family's house. He had respiratory issues, and the coroner's come back and said that he couldn't survive it. This was caused by the mold. I don't know what to say. I mean, I should say, first of all, and I can't remember the guy's name, that this only yesterday, we've now found out that the CEO of the Housing Association has actually been fired. I say being fired, but I never trust these people. I mean, he's been moved from his post. So whether that means he's going to another job or another organization, I don't know. But the headlines are that he's been fired. And and it's been implied it's in recognition of his culpability with this, because he was the head, but no statements. I haven't seen any statements on this. But what we do know is that the coroner has said that Awab, a toddler who was full of life and laughter, died because of prolonged exposure to damp and mold in his house. And I mean, that was the ruling. It's very clear. If you read the ruling and the comments that have been made, the coroner doesn't go as far as saying that the Housing Association is neglectful. The coroner just says that it should have responded to the mold. It shouldn't have given suggestion like, why don't you paint over the mold? That was one of the suggestions, right? That the father should paint over the mold. I've seen the images of the mold. There's one that breaks my heart, where you can see the toilet, you can see the little potty where the 2-year-old sit, and you can see the mold right next to him. Right next to, I mean, it makes me sick. Now this happened in December 2020. So again, it always takes time. But there was 6 days of evidence at Rochdale Coroner's Court, and this is where we are now. So, like I said, the CEO is gone. When I read the case, it just reminded me of Grenfell. It just reminded me of this profit over people policy. I mean, there's so much details. I don't even want to relay it all. There was a situation where there was another, where the father, who was looking, he said, like, look, can't you do some of the repairs, while, like now, immediately, while you're, while we're looking at my complaint. And the housing association, or whatever it is, the housing group, RBH, said, no, because you've got a claim against us, we can't do any work on the property at this moment in time. We had to wait for the claim to. And that was completely a lie. That's completely wrong. They could have done this. They could have dealt with this mold, and the mold was disgusting. And like I said, the coroner doesn't say that they're negligent. The coroner is really specific and says that actually they contributed to this, that they should have. There was inadequate ventilation. That it wasn't the family's fault. That the mold that came was what's that word? Commensurate with a family's normal day-to-day practices. So this was predictable. This was avoidable, and the whole definition of structural violence is actually preventing avoidable deaths. This was an avoidable death of a 2-year-old.
I'm sorry, Toyin. There's it's just so awful. I can't even. Angela says he refused to resign and was supposedly fired.
Oh, Okay, well, that's good to hear. Not that he refused to resign, because you'd think that there would be someone who's, I think he was earning something like £160,000 a year, and they give him a bonus. You'd think that, you know, someone almost would recognise that actually, if this happens under your watch, then you should go. But I'm glad that he was forced to resign. But what I want to see is a statement, and what I want to see is that housing association. It's one of those ones which came out of. It's not under the council, so it came out as independent. Again, it's all profit. It came out on its own to make its own money. You know, I want to see that have a statement saying what they're going to do about the rest of their portfolio, about the other properties. Are they going to do an audit? Are they going to look around to see, you know what I mean, like, you know, what's the situation with mold? What's the situation with outstanding complaints about parents talking about respiratory issues? I don't know. I mean, this is the thing. You know, I wish I was a millionaire. I wish I could set up a department for each of these things to make sure we push these things forward. We have the money in our community, but we don't. We rely on the state to do this work, and it never does it. The local authority never does it. Everyone says they're going to do it, but they never do it. They never follow it through. Sorry, let me move on to the next story. Surprise, surprise, which is the reason in many ways why this program's back again. The BBC is now set to axe all of its local radio stations that provide content for African people. That's why I'm here now. This is why now, even though I have an incredible workload, I'm exhausted, I'm not spending as much time with my family, my friends, and my health. I'm here now because we don't have a media network anymore that shares these stories, just to conscientize us, to let us know what's going on, and often to also share ideas of what we can do. So what's this story? Let me give you the backdrop for this story. It was revealed in The Voice newspaper, that there is staff at the BBC who are really angry because Dr. Nadibayo's program is being cut. What's his name? Eddie Amu's program is being cut. And the BBC are saying they're going to consolidate money. It's not just African shows, it's also Asian shows. They're going to consolidate money and share programming as a part of a major cost-cutting exercise to save the BBC. You know, and so basically all this distinctiveness in the programming that we used to be able to rely on, it will be gone. And I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say that I stopped listening to local community radio on the BBC several years ago. I think the last time I listened was when Henry Bonsu had a program on the BBC. I listened to a couple of Dr. Nadibayo and Eddie Nestor's programs. But the last time I contributed was years ago when Henry Bonsu was fired for bringing content that was what the BBC described as they felt was too intellectual, and felt that we didn't need intellectual news programs. We just needed more music, more tits and arse and N-word this and N-word that and whatever. But this is a really important series, argument, or news story, because you see, the BBC is ours. Whether we like it or not, we are forced to pay BBC tax, which they call a TV license. And the BBC radio programs, I'm talking about London. I just mentioned the London stations, but I know that across the UK, I've been to programs in Bristol, in Birmingham, and I know there are other programs in different regions outside London that do some amazing work, that bring in the local voices, that bring in the young people, the new voices, the next generation, and give them some kind of profile, some kind of exposure, so that they can share what it is that they're doing, share the concerns that they have. And even on another level, young journalists cut their feet at the BBC. By working on local radio stations like the BBC, they acquire the skills to know how to do journalism, how to move forward and do some amazing work in service to our community. So when the BBC says that it's going to axe them all, I think about Alex Pascal's program, Black Londoners. I think about Jess Schumann on Choice FM. I think about so many so many stalwarts who have fought for us to have a voice where we can communicate nationally, and that we have resources where we can do investigative work that picks up those stories that are normally better. The stories that I do every 2 weeks with Sister Oleander on this program, that pick up these stories, find the actors, find the people that matter, challenge the whole. You see, I can't bring in that housing association onto this program, not yet. I can't bring him in to scrutinize them and say, why did you take so long to file them? What are you doing to make sure that no one else in one of your properties is going through the same thing again? I can't do that yet. I don't have the resources, but the BBC does, and we own it. So when they say that they're going to axe all the African Caribbean local radio programs, when they say that, you know what I mean, they're going to merge them all together into this this colorblind, bland, shared programming networks across all the networks, you know, this is a nightmare. This is a serious loss. And yet I haven't heard this story on most of the major news channels. In fact, the paper that I don't have much respect for, even though it's good that it's now being run by someone like Lester Holloway, you know, The Voice is carrying it, and I have to big him up for doing it. Let me move on.
Sorry, Toyin, 1 second. There's a message from For Africa One. Just tuned in. Give thanks for another community news program. Much appreciated. Loved.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us this evening. I know there's so many things that you could be doing, everyone, and I appreciate your support and love being here. So I'm going to keep going through the news as well. And remember, again, you're always welcome to share comments or questions as well. So let's talk about more news. So, you know, you've heard over the last few months about some of the efforts that, you know, organizations are making to recognize or to deal with racism, their anti-racist statements and stances. Well, one of those you might remember was the hospital, was it Guy's Hospital? And they when the Colston statue came down, they put a hoarding around the statue. And many of us would have thought, oh, okay, maybe they're being sensitive. They're going to have a discussion about what to do with the statue. And they're being sensitive and recognizing the day of reckoning has come. Well, no, what they did is they kept the hoarding around there and waited until us to get bored and for the attention to focus on something else. And now that they've solved racism and Afrophobia, and they're on to saving the planet with climate change, they can now actually put the statue back up, which is exactly what they've done. The statue is now back up, uncovered. They're going to have a discussion about it. It'll probably be, we can either move it into a less prominent place, or we can have some interpretation, like a little plaque which says, "Oh, he was a naughty guy" on it. Yeah, that's the story. I could finesse it. I could give you more and more details, but does it really matter? I mean, that Colston, so Thomas Guy made shares from enslavement. He was involved in this process. Do I really need to say anything else? Nah. All you need to do is watch these actors, and it's interesting. This is not the NHS. This is the directors. This is the governors. These are the chairs of these institutions that make this happen. These are the ones who follow the government diktat to retain and explain. And that was a government diktat when the government, I think it was under, what's his name? He's back again, isn't he? Oliver Dowden. When Oliver Dowden sent that message out saying to all institutions, all councils, local authorities, all galleries, if there's any person involved in colonialism or enslavement, do not take them down. Our policy is retain and explain, or we'll cut your funding. Well, you will get no money from the government. And so a lot of them just lost it. They no ethics. They just lost their bottle. And actually, that's exactly what they've done. Well done, Guy's Hospital. You're just another one who showed that you're a bunch of hypocrites. Let's see what happens with this story. And again, on a similar theme, we now have a new chair of the British Museum. I say new, I think it's been in post for several months now. And that is that bastion of ethical values, the one who kind of delivered the most aggressive austerity politics on the UK after bankers had ruined the economy. I'm talking about George Osborne. So George Osborne is now the chair of the British Museum, and he says, don't expect us to be passive in the face of restitution. And he's pushing back against returning any of the looted artifacts that are held in the British Museum. Now, this is a conservative. This wouldn't be much surprise. He's using this argument, saying that, we hear all these calls for restitution, but creating the global British Museum was the dedicated work of many generations, and dismantling it must not be the coarse or the careless act of a single generation. This is the kind of mantra that he's saying. So we are the careless generation. Many generations kind of like, robbed people and nations all around the world, and it would be wrong for us. Who are we, the single generation, to say, actually, let's do some reparation and let's return them? Osborne even goes as far as saying, oh, and by the way, the law prevents it. And he's right, because there is I've forgotten what the Royal Act, which prevents the British Museum legally from returning artifacts. So he makes a case that, well, I'll tell you what we can do. We could perhaps in time, we can have some communications with these other nations. And what we can do in some stage is eventually loan artifacts. And I think you remember that loan argument with, I think it was Tristan Hunt at the V&A who came up with this one as well, that we would loan nations the stuff that was stolen from them during the time of colonialism. It's really sick. In fact, even with the Parthian, what's they called? The Parthian marbles, which is the classic works from Greek. They have a museum that's ready. The British Museum is going to clean them, and they won't tell the government. They won't let anyone know, or it's going to do refurbishment, and it won't let anyone know where they're moving them to. While they're going to be hidden from sight for maybe up to a year or two. So corruption. Sorry, I don't sound very articulate today. I'm just fed up. I'll move on to the next story, and again, I'm going to be even more fed up, because this one is the other side of that story. And if you're reading the headline, yes, it is exactly what it says it is. There is now an African American group which has filed a lawsuit seeking to prevent museums like the Smithsonian in Washington returning the Benin Bronzes to Nigeria. And you must be thinking, Brother Toyin, you're wrong. That doesn't make sense. Why would anyone do that? Well, it's a complex argument, and we haven't got time to go into this, because across the US, our family is unfortunately engaging in a level. It's almost like a civil war, not violent civil war, but it is a crisis of identity. So we have Africans in the States, they're family, right, who see themselves as not African. That's fine. No one's trying to force you to be African if you don't recognize that. So we have, the ADOS, we have the FBA. So FBA was Foundational Black Americans, and ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, anything but African. And so this group, the one that's filing this lawsuit, is called the Restitution Study Group. And they're a not-for-profit organization based in New York. They established themselves in 2000. No problem with them. They want to, they've made it clear they want to deal with innovative approaches to address the healing and injuries of exploited and oppressed peoples. But the way they see it is that it was African people that were responsible for this, and that those Benin Bronzes were kind of like the prizes. They were kind of like the currency. And so those people who are in America, who I can't call them Africans, they should have a right to see it without traveling to the continent, to the motherland, to see it. In fact, Deirdre Farmer Palman, the woman in the image, she makes a comment about why should we have to be obligated to travel to Nigeria to see them? I don't want to get kidnapped. That's what she said. She's the founder of this organization. So we have a lot of work to do. That's why I liked opening with remembering Kwame Ture. But we still have a lot of work to do if we don't know that we're Africans. And actually, we don't recognize that allowing a colonial state to hold on to our ancestral artifacts and treasures. I don't use that word treasures often, but that's what they are for many people. Religious artifacts cultural artifacts, and supporting the state to do that.
So, Toyin, can I just ask you, do they not recognize the fact that these belong to our people? They were stolen. You know, it's not a library where they said, okay, we'll return them after X amount of time. These were stolen. And are they trying to say that anything that gets stolen is like, you know, finders keepers type of thing, so we should be able to keep them? You know,
No, I think the argument's a little bit. I mean, I haven't had a chance to do a deep dive, and I'm probably not going to. But from what I can tell, the argument is that these were exchanged, or it's perceived that these were exchanged for African Americans, and so therefore African Americans have a right to them, and Africa no longer has a right to them. There's all this. It's a very strange, you know, you sold us twist in this, from what I can read. But I haven't, in all fairness, gone deep into this, and I don't really, because it will just hurt my head and it will break my heart. But there's an element of, they recognize they were stolen. I think that's clear. I think the thing is that they don't want to go to Africa. They don't want anything to do with Africa. I mean, that comment about, I don't want to get kidnapped going to Nigeria, I mean, it's just the most colonialist.
But it doesn't make any sense, though. They don't want to have anything to do with Africa, and yet they recognize that these are from West Africa. So why do they want to keep them then?
Because
that man, Chuck.
Sorry,
Toyin.
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize. We have issues to work through as a family.
Absolutely.
I mean, you've got to remember that even Africans in the US who have Caribbean heritage sometimes get discriminated against, let alone if they're coming from the continent. So, I mean, I've heard things said about Jamaicans, anyone who's doing prosperous, even if they're from Canada, have issues. And we know in the UK it's the same. We know that we spent years, I grew up years breaking down that African versus African Caribbean, you know, the diasporic versus continental beefs that we used to have. That's why I became a Pan-Africanist, to unite our family. And now we're seeing the clowns and the jokers within our community starting to bring those beefs back. And it's problematic. It really is problematic. I haven't covered the story about the Windrush compensation scheme, and perhaps I should do it. Maybe I'll do it another time, because even that there are issues with that. But
yeah, that's a big one.
But it's a big one. But this is just the news. This is the story. And I'm not going to, you know, we understand that our family has been through a lot of trauma, and we know that this group is not trying to hurt us. They're doing what they think is the right thing. And so this is where dialogue becomes important. And we might not see the end of it. A lot of Africans who have diasporic roots don't see me as their family. They see me, oh, well, your parents came from Nigeria, so you sold us. That's how they see me, and I accept that's how they see me. It makes no sense, because obviously they could have been, or it's not they could have been, they were one of my family members who were kidnapped. You understand?
Exactly.
It's like, I just hope that more of our people watch films like The Warrior King, you know what I mean, and understand the nuance of what it's like with colonialism and enslavement. You know, I hope they read the story of Zombi or Palmaris. I mean, even the Haitian Revolution, people don't even realize that as much as we talk about Toussaint Louverture and the brilliance, the absolute brilliance of his military strategy, he was also, before that moment, part of the system that was enslaving African people. If we talk about the Maroons in Jamaica, we talk about Nana. Nana is an amazing military warrior, but she did do a deal with the British so that if anyone who wasn't part of her community came back, she gave them back to the system of enslavement. So it's a very complex situation.
I think that's one of those subjects that it needs its own program, to be honest.
It does.
But I think we need to keep moving. But there are some comments, so just give me a second. Cosmic Jedi says, at this point, talking about the mindset of these people is a long thing, and that's the Americans. And he continues, I think it's a he because the image is a he. And wisdom denotes that certain mindsets of these people are born from the problem that inflicted them and us from outsiders a while back. Honestly, I do recognize their misled pain and anger and misdirected energy or wrath as well. And Angela says, please do. The in-house fighting is ridiculous. And she's talking about the Windrush compensation scheme. Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps we'll do another program or something. The Windrush compensation scheme is a difficult one because it's not reparations, and we shouldn't frame it as reparations. But
that's how it
also,
and
also, just because they've named it Windrush doesn't mean it's, because essentially it's really Commonwealth. I mean, it's just complicated, and I don't. This is why we need radio programs, right? This is why we need a TV. There should be a TV station like back in the day with, OBE and BEN and Arise, and we had channels where we could actually discuss these things, and we could bring in experts on those areas and learn together and create strategies and move forward. And now we're just back to supporting and taking and consuming all our media from platforms that have not got our best interests at heart. I'm going to move on to the next story because, again, this gets divisive.
Sorry, one more from Cosmic Jedi. This wrath or anger they are expressing, it should be focused on the root of this wahala, which even feels a little like distraction. And they and we are outcomes of certain seeds planted way back. Tamisai says, I agree. The whole philosophy behind ADOS and FBA is crazy and saddening. I often wonder whether some of their leaders are more concerned about being accepted by their former masters. How else do you explain ADOS having a white media director? And
I didn't even know that.
Wow, innit?
Sounds like the NAAPC, which was founded by Africans and Europeans.
Yeah, and then Cosmic Jedi says, by devious mindsets, and the current chatter is based on that planted, and it's displaying itself clearly.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for all those comments, and you're right. I mean, this is a program in itself, African identity, recognizing Afrophobia, and internalized Stockholm's. We have the equivalent of Stockholm syndrome, and we have to understand that this isn't something that just happened overnight. It took hundreds of years for us to get there, so it's going to take hundreds of years, or it could take hundreds of years for us to unravel it. So I try not to fuel divisions between any of us, but there are times when it's a serious challenge. I am going to move on, but I just wanted to share that story and provide the context. There's no point in me just pretending that it's just Babylon that gets up to foolishness. We are also implicated in some of this madness. The next story is one to do with higher education. That's where I'm based. And the QAA, which is it's not a regulatory body, but it's a benchmark body. It talks about the standards of degrees in universities. They've actually come out for the first time and said, you know what, we're going to need to make sure that you're addressing in these topics the impact of social injustice, colonialism, white supremacy, all these kind of things, and make sure that they're inclusive. Now, it probably won't surprise you to learn that the rabid right-wing media have gone nuts. They're kind of like, oh my God, they're bringing critical race theory. Rah, 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 rah. And what? And so what? And so what? What's wrong with talking about injustice with science, with geography, with the humanities? I mean, what's the problem with STEM subjects? What you think that white supremacist ideology only applies to history? Because that's just foolishness. So, I mean, the issue is that the QAA doesn't have any regulatory powers. So all the advice they give is voluntary. But I'm glad that they did this. I'm glad that they provided those benchmarks, because when the government provided its recommendations, it's explaining those about not having critical race theory, no mentioning of Black Lives Matter. Many schools took that as gospel because they were petrified to go against it. And so we started seeing this colorblind, tell both sides, So there's There's freedom fighters, and then there's imperialists. And the imperialists had their point of view was important too. They just wanted to take over the world and exterminate all the minority, well, they're not minorities, but we're not ethnic minorities. They wanted to exterminate all the Africans and Asian people on the planet. So we must tell both sides. So some schools actually were too frightened to say we're not going to do that. So it's nice that at a university level, the QA is saying, actually, we want you to integrate these kind of benchmarks into 25 subjects. And, we want you to think about the standards, think about the way that you are teaching, and making sure that you're actually being inclusive and you're being honest. And I say that because, I think sometimes we forget, well, I say we forget, we've got to always be careful with the we. It was just as an aside, because I have all this information at hand. It was on the 18th of November 1901 that the British government published a white paper explaining the need for concentration camps in South Africa, Azania. 18th of November 1901. So we hear a lot of rhetoric about kind of like, concentrations are bad, the Germans did all this, blah blah blah. But we don't understand that the British were doing the same thing. They would say that they had it was for the Boers and for their African help. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who are losing their lives, who have been it's good that the QA is doing this, and as much as people might moan about universities becoming woke and decolonizing being a problem, at the end of the day, truth is truth. And I'm never going to back down from supporting those kind of initiatives. Oh, I think I forgot to put the screen on. So you've heard all my rhetoric without my voice, my face. Well, hopefully that's been a relief for you. So let's go on to the next story, which probably links to the one I just spoke about just now. And this one is about an apology issued to the Bristol bus boycott campaigner, Guy Reed-Bailey. Now, it's taken some 60 years for him to receive an apology. And all the other campaigners, I think only 2 of them are left, have actually become ancestors. But this is good. This is a good step. What they call the Lord Mayor, he's written to our elder Guy Reed-Bailey. And they've apologized, and they've given him what they call a freedom of the city status. So all the people involved, all the boycott leaders will have this status. And this is important because we sometimes forget that, I'm a great fan of Rosa Parks. Anyone who knows me knows that. But we forget about the story of those fighters in the UK who were also instrumental in making changes to dismantle racism, or at least move towards dismantling racism, because it was the Bristol bus boycott that led to the Race Relations Acts in 1965. And that was one of the first pieces of legislation to ban discrimination in the workplace. So their decision to refuse to take a bus until the colour bar had been dropped was inspirational. So it's good that they're being recognised. It takes time for these things to happen. Normally, this is quite surprising. They normally wait until everyone has joined the ancestors. So the fact that there's a couple of people still alive to receive this apology is actually progress, believe it or not. But 60 years, right? Okay, I'm going to go through some news story. I think I've only got one news story actually about health, if I remember correctly. But this one is to do with sickle cell. Now, I'll admit right now, I haven't read the paper on this. I have actually read the article on this, but not the paper. I tend to be a bit nerdy, so normally I would have found the clinical paper and just gone through it. But what I can tell you is that there's this new treatment which takes stem cells from adults, and I can't remember. It gets them to multiply essentially, and it's resulted in the ability to manufacture red blood cells. Now, it's been reported in the media as lab-grown red blood cells because it sounds more fancy. It sounds more, oh my God, it's been made in the lab. But essentially, they're just human adult stem cells which are multiplied, and you're getting more blood cells from them. And this is actually, potentially really good news for someone if they're safe, and they seem to be safe so far. They've done some tests. There's been no problems, no side effects. This is good news if you're someone who regularly needs blood transfusions. And of course, this, as you know, sickle cell patients and warriors are those who need that. Those also with thalassemia need that. And one of the potential benefits of this new treatment, or this new process, is that, and then doing actual tests into it now, is that the cells that are generated from this process are said to last longer than regular blood cells. So that's actually a good win, because essentially blood cells die after a certain amount of time, and when you get a transfusion, you don't know how long they have left to go. So even though there's this this benefit because it's a new transfusion, the lifespan is limited, and hence you might need another transfusion in 6 weeks' time if you've got sickle cell. So with this treatment, if the blood cells that are being created from the stem cells actually are far, have a longer lifespan, are far better, this could be healthy, because one of the problems about having repeated blood transfusions is what we call iron overload. And so this itself causes problems. So every time you're taking a transfusion, your body is becoming stressed, and so we had to have other medical interventions to deal with other iron overload, and the cycle goes round. So I know, a bit nerdy, very important, but it is a development. It's good to watch on it, to keep an eye on this. Don't fall for this whole thing about lab-grown red blood cells. It makes it sound like some Frankenstein kind of thing. From what I can tell, it does seem to be just regular stem cells from adults cultivating new cells. And so I'll try and find a paper and read through it, and in that way I can answer any questions when it comes.
This I think is holds more hope, because
I'm listening. Oh, are you frozen? Oh, I think Sister Oleander has frozen.
Bodies are actually
I don't know if everything is still there. Hello? No? Okay. I'll move on to the next door. I'm sorry, Sister Oleander, I don't know what's happened there. It looks like you've frozen from my side. Okay, we've got a couple more slides to go. If you can come back, then we can take that comment as well. Yes, I think we've lost her. Okay, she'll log back in and we'll come back. In the meantime, I'll go to the next story. And as ever, we always like to close with some good news stories. And it has been difficult finding them. I'm going to be honest with you, this week. There hasn't been much good news. Well, let me show what little we do have. This is, I think, a lovely story about a family-run restaurant run by the siblings, Emeka and Ifeawina Frederick, who started their restaurant. I think it was in lockdown in February 2020. In fact, it was just before lockdown, if I remember correctly. And as most new businesses start at that time, they faced many challenges. And it looked like they were going to have to close down. And then they had this great idea about going to social media and saying, look, we need a favor from you, our community, please. We need you to help us with this. Things are looking really bad. If you can make a booking, we're looking to get 600 bookings within the next 2 months. And that will help us. That will be enough to save us. Just go onto our website, come in, book a table anytime within the next 2 months. And so, they did this on Instagram, and I'm not on Instagram, so I don't even know how difficult it is. I don't know if it's, but anyway, they did it. Within 4 days, they took 680 bookings. 4 days. You just got to love our community when it acts like this, when it just comes together and recognizes, you know what? We can help. We can do this. We can, and so it's a short-term fix. This is not saying that they're out in the woods yet. They're going to have a long-term strategy to keep them going. But I just want to big up themselves and all of those people who made those 680 bookings. just to keep this business alive. I think they're based in Tottenham as well. So, hey, it's a good news story. Another one here. This is probably more on a global level. This is really, when I see these world so-called leaders gather to talk about climate change. So we have COP27 this year. I don't really hold much hope that they're going to do anything that's useful. But this year, you know, it was on the news, and I kind of like about to fast forward as usual. And then I saw the Barbados, or the Bayesian Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, come on, and she just had some fire. She had some amazing ideas and comments, and she just talking it as it was supposed to be talked. And she's put forward something called the Bridgetown Initiative, and you know, and this is in response to what she says is that the countries, the Western nations, are responsible for the climate damage that they're talking about, and yet they're contributing the least to solving this problem. They're not doing it on a proportional level. They're asking nations that have been harmed, nations that they actually colonized and enslaved, that have been harmed by their actions, to actually contribute towards this, when actually that's not fair. That it's a disproportionate amount of aid they're calling from these nations who are barely able to survive themselves. In fact, there was I haven't got it now. There was this video by the French Prime Minister on not the French, the Italian Prime Minister on Twitter. I saw yesterday, where she talks about the impact of the CFA. That's the French currency on Francophone nations, and how the French are still exploiting those nations on the legacies of enslavement and colonialism. But anyway, this particular story, the Bridgetown Initiative, she's calling for the IMF, that's the International Monetary Fund, to issue $650 billion annually in its reserve currency. And this is known as special drawing rights. And she wants it to do it for 20 years so that any country can finance its climate needs. And, you know, people think, well, 650 billion every year, that's ridiculous. How can the IMF put down that kind of money? Where can it draw it from? How is that possible? It's never been happened before. That's a ridiculous amount. Taking this climate thing too far. Well, actually, no, it's not ridiculous, because it's the same amount of money that the IMF dispensed during the global coronavirus pandemic. And that's what it issued to aid the recovery. $650 billion annually. So if the world, which is running around Egypt, running around the planet, talking about climate change and how this country must shut down this, shut down this and shut that down, which I'm not saying that, I agree with many of these things, but not seeing how you're going to compensate and how you're going to help nations to actually generate clean power sources, renewable energy, kind of like do all the things to build its infrastructure so it's able to weather this storm without causing more climate damage. You're going to have to put your money in your pocket to do this. So anyway, that's my mangled take on on this story. It's good news, right? I just like the idea that it's an African nation leading the initiative, and we'll find out what they decide, I think, probably by Monday. And the last story for this week, we're going to talk about a good news story, is one of our brother Nathan Quilly Dennis, who won this prize called the Bruntwood for his debut play, Boring Techno Makeout Jams. Now, I haven't seen it, but it's been billed as this discovery, this journey of self-discovery, where he goes through African masculinity through Beyonce lyrics, mixes up with raves and barbershop discussions. I haven't seen it. He's based in Birmingham, but he won the Playwright Prize, which is £16,000. So that's a really nice chunk of change for some creative energy that's actually positive. And that's what I hear about this project, that actually it's an ode of joy, an ode of love, makes you laugh out loud. It's something that's uplifting. And I think right now, with the cost of living being what it is, with the problems we're facing in the world, And with things looking like they're going to get bleaker, it's nice to hear of artists who are actually trying to bring some joy into our world, being rewarded for that, and actually, hopefully, empowered to do the same thing again and again. So that's the last story for this week. I don't know, Sister Oleander, was you able to come back in? Ah, there we are. I think you had something you wanted to say, and I think we lost you, didn't we? Let's see if we can.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I honestly don't. I think I was just talking about the sickle cell thing, but I think it's really good that this is another option which is not medically based in terms of medication or drugs. And it sounds like the side effects are much less than other interventions. So I'm hopeful, and I really am looking forward to us hearing some good news stories of people that we might know who have gone through it. So yeah, that was it. I just wanted to say also, Toyin, if you'd seen the 96 globes that were in Trafalgar Square, did you see
No,
that?
is this the world? What's it called? The world reimagined.
Reimagined, yeah.
Yes,
So
I haven't
apparently
seen them yet.
okay, so they were all brought into Trafalgar Square today. Well, not today, I think it was yesterday, for the weekend. And before they go to auction, and they're going to be sold online in an online auction. And the money will go to either the artists or to other sort of projects that might help with things like diversity and things that help people. So yeah, I just thought that was quite interesting. I never got to see it, but I saw some of them around Hackney. There were 96 in total. So I wonder if anyone else saw these globes.
Yeah, I never saw them. I'm aware of the project because it's been around or the plans for it's been around for a long time. So I've spoken to a few people who organised it and were involved in it. But it's nice to see that they've kind of like they realised their dreams, and it's coming to a happy conclusion. But talking about coming to a happy conclusion, I think it's time for us to kind of like close this program down. So as ever, I want to thank our brother Colin for the research, Sister Naona helping with the slides, and all of you, our legality supporters and community, for supporting and listening. I know I've been a bit rambly today, lack of sleep, I think, and just being a bit irate about some of the stories. Whenever young people are, let me not go there, it just messes with my spirit. But we'll be back on the 4th of December. I can't believe it's December already. So we'll see you then. And yes, Sister Oleander, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I mean, thanks everybody for listening. I've just put that in the comments. And do take care. The winds of change are coming. And it's getting colder as well. So please, everybody, do take care and wrap up warm.
Yeah. So please, yes, very good advice. Take care. And as ever, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.
Ashe.